Right, I can't see you anymore. So if that hasn't worked and you can't see my slides, then if someone could just unmute themselves and let me know.
It's working.
Otherwise, sorry.
It's working.
Good, thank you. It's always that awkward moment of I don't know, and then I'm just everyone's waiting in limbo. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the election result from May's election into the Senedd and what that means for unpaid carers based on what we know so far. But bearing in mind, it was literally about 6 weeks ago. We're still in the earliest of early days, so a lot of what will happen and what we will find out and learn, kind of is yet to be determined. Before we do that, a lot of you, I would imagine, are already very, very familiar with them, with unpaid carers and with Carers Wales. So I've got some kind of refresher intro slides for anyone that isn't. For anyone that hasn't engaged with us already, we're part of Carers UK and we operate across all of Wales, Carers Wales. And we're a campaigning charity. We exist to make life better for unpaid carers, and we do that via campaigning alongside unpaid carers and on your behalf as well. And we also provide a lot of information and advice to carers too, to try and help navigate that caring role. We're a membership charity, so we've got about 5,000 members in Wales. The vast majority of members are unpaid carers, and then a few people who are supporters and people with an interest in unpaid care. Membership's totally free. It just enables you to basically get updates on what's going on, and then access to things like, for example, the MeTime sessions and our Carers Connect online forum too. And then just to say, we're a very small team in Wales. There's 9 of us currently, and there'll be 10 of us by the middle of next month, which is very exciting. We've got 2 new starters, which I'm sure you will all meet in due course. But yeah, 10, 11 of us to cover the whole of Wales with hundreds of thousands of unpaid carers is quite a thin spread. So yeah, a lot of our team are current or former carers, and people come and work with us, as a result often of their experiences of caring. And we try as much as possible, as I'm sure lots of you will know, to co-produce all the work that we do with unpaid carers. We don't just want it to be people like me and Jake coming up with stuff in a dusty office somewhere in Cardiff. We want to make sure that everything that we're saying, everything that we're doing is true to your experience as a carer. So that's the Carers Wales section. A very, very brief overview of unpaid carers in Wales, because I'm sure, again, a lot of you are pretty au fait with a lot of this. So the census reckons there are about 310,000 unpaid carers in Wales, but actually we think that's a significant underestimate, and that it's probably going to be closer to 500,000 in a population of just over 3 million. That's obviously quite a big proportion. If all unpaid carers were to stop caring tomorrow, and down tools, it would cost at least £10 billion a year to replace that care in Wales. But again, that figure, despite it being absolutely massive, is probably an underestimate. That's based on that census figure. So it's probably likely to be even higher than that. We know that the vast majority of unpaid carers aren't able to balance paid work with unpaid care. But there are still around about 140,000 people balancing paid work with unpaid care to a greater or lesser extent, including it's about 30,000 people who work sort of part-time or full-time and then care for 50 hours a week. And the pressure that puts people under, you don't need me to tell you. So yeah, lots of issues with that sort of stuff too. And yeah, just to kind of point out, my dog's decided this is the moment he's going to come and get involved. Nearly half of people in Wales either have provided unpaid care at some point, and then the other half will have been in receipt of care. So unpaid care, as a lot of you will know, is hugely prevalent throughout Wales. It completely underpins our society, and so that's why we spend so much of our time talking about it and trying to get everyone else to talk about it too. Now, despite carers' importance, there are lots of issues that unpaid carers face. And again, a lot of you will have heard this spiel before, so forgive me if this is not news. But we see lots of issues for carers in relation to poverty and finances, health and wellbeing, but in particular mental health, and paid work. And despite the fact that unpaid carers have what is on paper a relatively good set of rights in Wales afforded to them as unpaid carers, the vast majority of people never see those rights realised and recognised. So lots of issues for us to get stuck into. The poverty rate among carers is significantly higher than it is among non-carers, but we know that actually in Wales just the poverty rates generally are pretty poor. So that's a real issue. We know that lots of carers are having to cut back on essentials like food or heat in their homes, and that actually this is increasing, not decreasing, which is pointing to this all going in the wrong direction. Lots of carers report having bad or very bad health, mental health, and we know that there is an added impact on carers' health as a direct result of their caring role. And then, as we said earlier, despite the fact that on paper carers have pretty good rights in Wales, a tiny percentage of unpaid carers ever see those legal rights fulfilled. So all unpaid carers are entitled to have their needs assessed as an unpaid carer as a kind of base right, but yeah, a fraction ever see that, and then even fewer carers then go on to have any sort of statutory support as a result of that assessment or any sort of engagement with services as well. So yeah, there's a bleak opening for you all. How about that? So that's the backdrop of what we're going to be discussing, kind of the election in and what that means going forward and how we can start to right this wrong, to be totally honest. So before we get stuck into the kind of depth and detail on what the parties are saying and what that means for carers, we'll just do a very, very quick refresher for people who might not be as nerdy as me and Jake with regard to the Welsh Parliament and kind of the state of play as things are now. So for those of you that are, again, sort of perhaps a bit newer to this or don't spend as much time as we do talking about Welsh politics, the Senedd Cymru or the Welsh Parliament, lots of people will just call it the Senedd, is in Cardiff Bay. It has 96 MSs elected, so that's up from just before May's election. There were 60, there's now 96. There are 16 constituencies spanning all of Wales, and in each constituency you'll be represented by 6 MSs, and so no matter which one you write to, the idea is hopefully at least one of them will be supportive of the thing that you're writing to them about, and therefore can hopefully raise that issue with the relevant people. Why do we talk about the Senedd and MSs so much as opposed to Westminster and MPs? Well, actually, it's because a lot of the things that impact on unpaid carers' lives, like health and social care, housing, transport, education, are policy areas that are devolved to the Welsh Government, and therefore the business around them is conducted through the Senedd, through the Welsh Parliament. So that's basically why a lot of the time carers Wales, we spend the vast majority of our time engaging with MSs and the Welsh Government as opposed to MPs in the UK Government, because all the areas that carers tell us are important to them, broadly, apart from a notable couple, are devolved to the Welsh Government, and therefore MSs are in charge of them. So in May 2026, so only last month, we saw Wales's first ever change election in the Senedd. Before that, Welsh Labour were always the largest party and therefore would form the government either on their own or in coalition with other smaller parties. So in May, we had something quite momentous, and Plaid Cymru, for the first ever time, won the election, won the most seats and are the largest party, and have since now formed the Welsh Government. So that is in and of itself something new to contend with. But what that also means is that, as the point below says, we've got a new government, but we've also got new ministers and new opposition MSs whose role is to basically scrutinise what the Welsh Government are doing or are saying that they're going to do. So whereas before in past elections, the opposition who have the kind of shadow briefs, if you like, were often the Welsh Conservatives or Plaid Cymru themselves opposing Welsh Labour. Now, actually, Reform UK Wales are the official opposition with the second most seats. So we've got a whole new opposition party, but then because Plaid Cymru are a minority government and chose to go into power without being in a coalition with another party, actually, we've got a bunch of opposition parties, which is an opportunity for us because it means that at least one of them, hopefully, will be receptive to some of the stuff that we're asking for and talking about. So as well as Reform as the official opposition, you've also then got Welsh Labour, who are now an opposition group, and then the Welsh Conservatives. We've got, for the first time ever as well, 2 Wales Green Party MSs, and then a Welsh Liberal Democrat MS as well. So there's a good kind of spread of parties in opposition who we can talk to about things that carers, kind of want to see, and hopefully they can apply to scrutiny to the government too. We won't go through the different parties' manifestos in any sort of great depth and detail at this point, because otherwise you'll be here all day, because I'll talk about it all day. But some of the parties that were standing in the election, in fact, most of the parties that were elected to the Senedd, did commit to some carer-facing asks if they were elected to government, which is really positive. I think it's a slight change to perhaps where it happened in the past, which shows perhaps carers are more on the radar. But importantly, there were a series of asks in Plaid Cymru's manifesto, and given that they're now won the election and they're in government, that gives us something to work with, basically, in terms of, right, well, you said you're going to do this, so let's get on with it, shall we? So that's just a very, very quick refresher. If anyone's got any questions, chuck them in the chat and I'll come to them at the end, because I'm conscious this will be probably a bit of information overload if you go through. I'm also trying to fend off a dog that is desperate to jump on my lap. So my attention span is limited. So we've talked a bit about the context. Let's talk a bit about the people. So these are some of the key movers and shakers. We'll keep it very, very high level. Otherwise, we'll start getting into all kinds of stuff. But in terms of the Welsh Government, these are three of the key people who we're going to be talking to about unpaid carers over the next few years. So Rhun ap Iorwerth on the left, that's our new First Minister of Wales and the leader of Plaid Cymru. He obviously is responsible for setting the overall kind of agenda and direction of the government, and ultimately, the buck stops with him as to what happens in Wales. So while we probably won't be doing our day-to-day dealings with Rhun as much as I'm sure we would like to, he's there for us basically to hold to account if things aren't going well for carers. Where we will probably be spending more of our time talking is to Mabon ap Gwynfor MS and Delyth Jewel MS, who are both in the portfolio, the Ministry for Health and Care. So Mabon is the Cabinet Minister for Health and Care, which means that he basically leads that team of ministers, of which there's him, there's Delyth, and there's also Nellis Evans, who is the Deputy Minister for Public and Preventative Health, off the top of my head. But because health and care is such a massive portfolio and a massive policy area, they've broken it down, basically. So Mabon has overall responsibility, but will probably spend a lot of his time focused on things like waiting lists, building the surgical hubs that were in Plaid Cymru's manifesto, and dealing with the health service, because it's the bigger, more expensive part of the system, and if we're honest, probably has more aspects to it that need immediate urgent attention, despite there being plenty of those in social care as well. So Delyth Jewel is the Deputy Minister for Social Care, Mental Health and Women's Health, and that's probably our go-to person. If you go on the Welsh Government website, and I'll put the link to this in the chat afterwards, there is a list of all the cabinet members, and if you click on their pictures, it will give you all of their responsibilities. So you can see really clearly who is in charge of what, basically. When you look for unpaid carers, that's under Delyth, as you would expect, given her brief. So yeah, we will be working closely with Delyth over the next few years while she's in post, and she holds the kind of first level of responsibility to carers, but Mabon and Rhun also have a kind of stake in it too. Thinking outside of government as to who our key movers and shakers are, you've got these three, but also plenty more. So James Evans, who I know some of you have met, and we've done some work with in the past. He was a Welsh Conservative MS in 2021 up until late last year, early this year, and then joined Reform and was elected again in May as a Reform MS. He's now the Shadow Minister for Health, Prevention and Sport, and basically will be Mabon's opposite number, providing the scrutiny in that respect. So while he will be kind of doing the same thing as Mabon in the same sort of spaces, he'll be leading that health team in the Reform benches who shadow the Welsh Government ministers, which means that Claire Archibald, who is brand new, elected for the first time in May, is our Shadow Minister for Social Care. So we've already exchanged some positive emails with Claire, and she's already asked some questions about unpaid carers and what the government plans to do about unpaid carers in the chamber, which is really, really positive to see. And based on one of her contributions in the Senedd as well recently, she also said that she is an unpaid carer, which can be quite helpful for us if someone has that lived experience of being a carer. Sometimes it can, not always, can mean that it's easier for us to connect with them and talk about carers issues. So James and Claire are the two Reform MSs who are going to be doing probably the most scrutiny work directly with Mabon and Delyth and the Welsh Government. But I also wanted to flag, I don't know if you can actually see my cursor, I don't think you can. On the right, Jane Bryant, she's a Welsh Labour MS. Now, the reason I've put her on here as one of our key movers and shakers is because she recently was elected as the chair of the Senedd's Health and Social Care Committee. The Health and Social Care Committee is a committee of MSs, but focuses and does a lot of the kind of more detailed scrutiny work that the Welsh Government is doing in that health and care space. So Jane has a really, really important role in leading that committee and the work that it's going to do to hold the Welsh Government to account. Some of you were involved in the last Senedd's Health and Social Care Committee inquiry into unpaid carers. And we'll talk about this in a bit more depth and detail as we go on. But they published a report in April, which gave 35 recommendations for the next Welsh Government, at the time, the current Welsh Government now. And so there's a role that Jane will be playing in that successor committee to hopefully hold the new Welsh Government's feet to the fire in that respect and make sure that those recommendations are put into place. So those are just 6 of 96. Let's keep it high level initially, but we can talk a bit more about some of the folks if we want to after. But just to kind of help you guys put some faces to names and to tell you who we're going to be talking to predominantly over the next few years while they're in these posts. So yeah, those are some of our key movers and shakers at this point. And what we'll do next is talk about what some of the opportunities are and some of the challenges are for us as over the next 4-year period, because this Senedd runs from 2026 till 2030. And there are lots of opportunities. There are also lots of challenges. So I've got 2 slides for opportunities and 1 for challenges, though, so I'm trying to be optimistic. As we've kind of referred to, Plaid Cymru in their manifesto, which was obviously the winning manifesto, made a bunch of specific commitments to unpaid carers, which is great to see. We worked really hard to get some of those in there, and it wasn't just us doing that. We know obviously unpaid carers were doing that, and lots of other carer charities as well. So I think we've done a good job as a campaigning group to see some of that in there. I won't talk about them specifically at this point, but we can go into it after, and I can share the links if people want to have a look and see what's in there. But they basically related to carers needs assessments and those being done in a timely fashion. There was a comment in there about respite and breaks from caring and the need to be better on that. There was a specific commitment around palliative. Sorry, is someone trying to come in there?
No, sorry, I sneezed.
Oh, that's all right. Bless you.
I didn't realise I was.
No,
live.
don't worry. You're absolutely fine. Yeah, if anyone does have any questions, check them in the chat and I'll come to them afterwards. But yeah, don't worry. That's absolutely no problem. Yeah, there was a specific section in Plaid Cymru's manifesto about palliative care and end-of-life care and getting more support for carers who are looking after people in that sort of particular stage, but also commitments around poverty and welfare. So yeah, we can talk about those in more depth afterwards if that's helpful, but that's the broad brush overview of what Plaid Cymru had in their manifesto relating to unpaid carers. So that gives us some opportunities in respect of they've committed to this stuff. They said they're going to do it. And they've got 4 years. So we'll be working very hard to see that done. The sooner the better, and make sure that those things they're committed to are done and completed. We've already spoken a little bit about the last Health and Social Care Committee and those 35 recommendations they gave for this Welsh Government to consider. So that's a great opportunity for us. We worked really, really hard, as did a lot of you on this call, to shine a spotlight on carers issues and give that next government some food for thought as to what really needs to happen. The 35 recommendations that are in there are detailed. And so we are already pushing the government to respond to that report and to those recommendations and to hopefully see all 35 put in there. If you just heard a squeak, apologies, he's just found one of his toys and decided he wanted to contribute. And then another opportunity that's worth mentioning at this point too is before the election, the last Welsh Government launched a draft strategy for unpaid carers, which went out to public consultation, so people were able to look at what they were proposing and respond with what they thought about it. And then this closed before the election period. So to be totally honest, we responded to the consultation response and said it was quite a poor strategy and didn't go anywhere near far enough to address the issues that unpaid carers face in Wales. And so one of the opportunities for us is looking at, what the new minister wants to do about this strategy. And it's a really, really early, sort of a key early signal from our point of view. If the minister decides, actually, I don't like this strategy and I want to make changes to it, it doesn't go far enough, that's good news for us and for unpaid carers. If the strategy gets waved through without a lot of changes, then that's not as good news and probably means that either the minister is broadly supportive of what was in the initial strategy, which we would suggest is not anywhere near adequate and ambitious enough, or hasn't had enough time or capacity to get stuck into the detail. And both of those would be a problem from our perspective. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on, but I've put it in the opportunities box for now at this point. And we expect to see that launch later in the year. Some more opportunities that are a bit fluffier and less tangible, to be honest, but still worth knowing about. So before the election, Carers Wales, but also lots of other charities and lots of carers were doing work directly with MSs and people who were standing for election to raise the profile of unpaid carers and the things that you guys care about and want to see happen and change. And I think we're in a better place now than perhaps we were. I mean, I wasn't here in 2021, but I joined in 2023, and we're definitely in a better place now than we were in 2023. In terms of the number of MSs and those key decision makers who have a kind of broad awareness of unpaid carers. We really want all 96 MSs to know, who carers are, what the issues are, and what the solutions are. But obviously, some of them are going to have a greater level of knowledge and detail than others. So I think we're in a better space now than we were before. There's still a lot more work to do, but that's a positive for us, because it means we have to spend less time then doing that base level awareness raising, and we can move straight onto the right. We know what the problems are, so let's start cracking on with the solutions chat, which is kind of hopefully where we are now. One thing to look out for as well as an opportunity for us is that the new Welsh government elected in May will be very, very alive to the situation that the UK government elected in 2024 are finding themselves in now. The public want and need to see change across a whole lot of areas, and are voting for change in the last sort of couple of elections that we've seen. And so we know, having spoken to Plaid Cymru figures before the election, that they're very alive to this, and that they know that they need to make those changes and make them early so that people can see them and feel them, and people aren't going to get frustrated and they'll become unpopular early on. So that's an opportunity for us, and means that we can hopefully get carers on that radar and start to see some changes early on. And related to that point, having a new suite of ministers in, there's an opportunity there in that the new minister might be more willing to get stuck into the detail. I think in the past, we've seen levels of interest and levels of engagement differ with different political stakeholders across previous governments and previous parties. Whereas now we've got an opportunity to make sure this is firmly on the agenda, and hopefully we've got a minister more willing to get stuck in and get involved in the detail. And then finally, as a bit of an opportunity, there's cross-party support for a lot of what we're talking about, which is really helpful. If you've got that kind of ideological divide for issues that you're campaigning on, and I'm sure we can all think of some where there's very clear difference between sort of left and right, or different parties on where they sit on certain issues. Actually, with unpaid carers, there's broad support. It doesn't look exactly the same across party lines, and no one should expect it to. But broadly, I think people recognise the status quo is not sustainable, and that we need to see more support for carers, and whether they're wearing a red, yellow, green, blue rosette even. There's recognition of that, and that's a good starting point. If we're working with people who can recognise that, no matter their kind of political ideology, we're in a good space. So, on to the challenges. So the first one to kind of allude to is that, as you saw when we had the kind of mugshot of all the people up earlier, their portfolio is massive. Social care in and of itself is a huge policy area, of which unpaid carers is just one part of. But when you add into that mental health, which is obviously a massive societal issue, and women's health equally, that's a big brief to get your head around. So the challenge there for us is making sure that we can make sure that unpaid carers are top of the agenda, or as high up the agenda as you can get. Because there's going to be a lot of different organisations, causes, charities, people in those areas covered by mental health, women's health and social care, who are after her attention and after investment, as are we. So yeah, it's going to be a challenge to try and cut through all of that noise, but we're pretty confident, and we think that it's a good opportunity as well, and we can link it. There's clear links between women's health and unpaid care, and very, very clear links between mental health and unpaid care. So while it is a big area for one person to look after. There's scope for us to try and sort of draw the links. Some of you might have already seen, if you're slightly more perhaps engaged with the politics of it, that the Welsh Government have just published the first part of their supplementary budget, which is about 200 billion quid's worth of kind of like stuff to play with out of a 27 billion pound budget. So disappointingly in that it's not clear to us yet whether there's anything specifically for carers. A lot of what they've published that they're going to spend, about 100 and something million of it, is going into the NHS, which it might have an impact on unpaid carers, if people are getting the treatment that they need. But yeah, nothing that we can see in there is specifically for carers around, kind of mitigating poverty, increasing access to respite, anything of that kind of sort. So what is probably quite clear early on is that despite a £27 billion Welsh Government budget, everybody is going to be asking for extra investment. Unpaid carers need extra investment, and we're not shy about saying that. But it isn't clear yet that there's additional resource for carers at this point. So that'll be something that we need to change as we carry on. And linked to that point really is as we've kind of mentioned, unpaid carers are one of a number of areas in Wales where clearly things are not working as they're meant to be, and therefore the noise coming out of campaigning organisations, charities around the need for investment is pretty vast. There are lots of worthy causes, so that's going to be a challenge, but again one that we're alive to, and we need to be agile and creative basically about how we position unpaid carers issues. Care spans all policy areas and fundamentally underpins our societies, so it's not difficult to do that, but just something if you see us talking about unpaid carers from a very weird angle or viewpoint, that's what we're doing. We're just trying to get it across everyone's desk as much as possible. And the final one is a bit topical, I guess, but that instability that we're seeing in Westminster at the moment, and beyond, obviously the Iran war had a massive impact on petrol prices and all of the stuff. So all of those pressures out, you could have a Welsh Government that comes in with the best of intentions and makes all the best sort of plans, that has them then completely scuppered by any manner of stuff outside of Wales. So that has a real sort of possibility of causing some impact for us and for carers in Wales. You might find that whoever replaces the Prime Minister comes in and wants to do loads of stuff on social care, which will be great because hopefully then Wales will get the consequential money. They might well come in and decide, actually, all that stuff you were doing about cutting disability benefits and PIP, let's do that again, which would be a massive issue. So we just don't know at this point what's going to happen, but that could well have a massive impact on all the work that we do, in a positive or a negative way. Maybe I was probably being cynical when I put this in the challenge section, because there are opportunities to it too, but we'll see. Last few slides. So with all that in mind, what now, what next? We've already spoken a bit about the carer strategy, but as we've mentioned, how that is published will be a really, really useful signal for us as to how ambitious this government is going to be for carers. As we said earlier, if it's waved through looking very similar, then we'll have a lot to say about it. If the minister decides, actually, this isn't reflective of the ambition that I've got for unpaid carers and I want to do more, then we know that we're working from a positive point at the start then. We also expect to see, as we've mentioned earlier, a response to that committee report from the last Senedd Health and Social Care Committee, and are pushing for a timeline on this to try and get some clarity as to when we'll see a response. That again will also give us a really clear signal on what this government is thinking about unpaid carers. If we're seeing all 35 or most of the 35 recommendations accepted by government, that'll be a positive sign. If there's pushback and significantly less than 35 are accepted, or there's not even a response, which is a possible outcome, unlikely but possible, that again will give us a signal as to kind of what we need to be doing. And in light of both of the above, we've been doing a lot of early engagement with all of the new MSs, whether they're returning or newly elected in May, but also their teams. MSs all have teams in their constituencies, but also in their Senedd offices. The Senedd offices often look at research and policy, and then their constituency teams often do casework, some of you will have written to your MSs, I'm sure, but they'll have teams of people who are there to try and support people in their constituencies and help them with issues they're having. We want MSs to be aware of unpaid carers for obvious reasons in terms of scrutiny and pushing carers' agendas in the Senedd. But we want their teams to be aware too, because they're going to ultimately be seeing carers come through the casework system and then supporting their members to contribute and apply scrutiny. So we're doing a lot of engagement with MSs and their teams. And then, as well as we've mentioned above with regard to the strategy and the last Health and Social Care Committee report, one thing to probably keep an eye out for is the next full budget. So the last budget was passed before the election by the previous government, and the supplementary budget I mentioned earlier, without getting too nerdy and nichey, is only in the grand scheme of things, relatively small amount of money compared to the whole budget. The 2027-28 financial year budget, so the one they'll be working on autumn, winter, and then into spring next year, will be Plaid Cymru's first proper budget that they basically have sole control over. That again will give us a really good idea of what their priorities are, where they're investing the money to kind of progress those, and where carers sit in that kind of agenda. So that's something just to keep an eye out for, and we'll be doing a lot of work on that towards the end of this calendar year. And then just some other things to look out for. So we spoke a bit about that ministerial team for health and care that Mabon leads and Delith is a key part of. But the other person that we mentioned, Neris Sevens, who is an MS for Caerfyrddin, or Shigar, I don't remember what it's called, but West Wales Carmarthenshire. She's the Deputy Minister for Public and Preventative Health. It's not yet clear to us, sort of what that role means for unpaid carers, because as you will all know, and as we know, unpaid carers are a critical part of public and preventative health and that preventative agenda. If we can better support carers to look after people closer to home or in their homes, then that has a massively positive effect on our public health and the systems that support that. So it'll be really interesting to see how much unpaid carers are on the agenda of that portfolio, and if not, we'll be making sure they are, and then what that means for carers too, because I think, yeah, it's a new role. It's an interesting new kind of angle on it, and so that's just something that we're keeping an eye on, and it's worth kind of looking out for. Some of you might have already been aware, but in Carers Week, the UK government launched a consultation on plans to update working rights for unpaid carers. Fundamentally, what this means is paid carers leave, in addition to that unpaid carers entitlement that was brought in 2024. This isn't a silver bullet by any stretch, but could make a bit of a difference for a lot of people in enabling more carers to better balance paid work and unpaid care, which can then help mitigate things like poverty, gives people breaks from their caring role, even though it's to do with work. Some people tell us that actually, I'd love to go out and work just as a break from my caring role. So that might have some impact on what happens for carers in Wales, and if more people are able to, kind of balance that and hopefully mitigate the effects of poverty, that might mean there's more capacity in the system to help other people too. So that's something we're just keeping an eye on. And colleagues in London are doing a lot of work on that, because employment law and employment rights sit with the UK government as their responsibility. We've already mentioned that Plaid are a minority government, so no party in the Senedd has a majority, unlike in Westminster. So what this means is parties have to work together to pass business and pass laws and pass budgets, fundamentally. So keeping an eye on what opposition parties are saying about unpaid carers is going to be really, really important. But actually, not necessarily reform, because it's very unlikely that reform and Plaid will agree on a lot, but also that reform would ever want to support Plaid in doing stuff. They are the opposition. It's very likely they'll oppose. But what you might find is that smaller parties, like, for example, Welsh Labour and the Welsh Conservatives, who I think have 9 seats and 7 seats respectively, those two would give enough votes to take Plaid over to a majority. So actually, keeping an eye on what they're saying and what they're doing about carers, and we're engaged with both, will be really important, because they might then go to the negotiating table for their votes with a shopping list of stuff, and we would love to see unpaid carers on that list. So just want to keep an eye out for. But then finally, before we get into questions, obviously we've got a new government. This is the first time in the whole of devolution in Wales that a party, not Labour, has been in government. So before the election, there was lots of rumour, there was lots of talk that actually, would Plaid be really radical if they won the election and, for example, do away with health boards and do things differently in that healthcare space. That's not on the agenda at the moment, but as we spoke about earlier, they'll be keen to be seen to make a difference really, really quickly. Otherwise, as we've seen in Westminster, governments can become really, really unpopular really quickly. So what you might find is that, while they're getting their feet under the desk and settled in, starting to learn how this all works, ministers will be looking out for where those blockages are. What is stopping them, whether it's people, whether it's organisations, whether it's systems and procedures, what is stopping them from doing what they were elected to do and what they want to do. Now, that might be parts of the health system, that might be parts of local government and councils, that might be regional partnership boards. One of the areas that we looked at in the last Senedd Health and Social Care Committee report was, the role of RPBs in supporting carers. So while we aren't expecting any major radical change in that space yet, wait until the end of next year or the start of 2028, because if ministers aren't seeing the progress that they deem sufficient enough, stuff might change there, which will have a big impact on carers. So want to keep an eye out on. And with that, we are on 2 questions. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen, stop the recording, and then if anyone has any questions, we can do that. Let me just stop the recording now.